All right, let's jump into another deep dive. This time, we're heading over to Iraq to check out the West Qurna 2 oil field. Specifically, this fascinating Mishra formation. We've got this new research paper, and it's really using some cool tech, like
Okay.
3D modeling, and they're looking at real well data, all to try and figure out just how much oil we're talking about. I'm really excited to dig into this.
Yeah, the Mishra Formation, it's pretty famous in the oil and gas world.
Yeah.
It's this limestone formation, late Cretaceous period, and it's found all over the Arabian Gulf,
Yeah.
known for holding a lot of oil. And this study, well, it's zeroing in on the structure of the formation at West Qurna 2 and what that means for, actually getting the oil out.
So it's not just about how much oil is down there, but like how easy is it to actually get to it? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And this study's using a 3D model, right, to visualize the reservoir. And that's really helpful, especially with complex formations like this one.
I'm already intrigued. But before we get to that 3D model, can you kind of break down the Mishra formation for me? Like structurally, how's it laid out?
Okay, so imagine like a layer cake, right? You've got these two main layers, MRA at the top and then MRB below it. Now, MRB, it's divided further, but the important thing here is that MRB, especially those deeper sections, that's where the biggest chunk of oil is. And that's thanks to its thickness and some really nice properties that make it, well, good for oil production.
Okay, nice properties. I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about here? What should we be looking for when we try to figure out if a formation is good at holding and producing oil?
All right, so there are three key properties we got to look at. First up, porosity. So that's basically the spaces within the rock where the oil can hang out. You can think of it kind of like a sponge.
Ah, I see.
Then we have permeability. That's all about how easy it is for fluids to flow through those spaces. It's kind of like a network of pipes. And lastly, we got water saturation. And that tells us how much water is already taking up space down there, which could, make it harder to get the oil out.
Okay, so I'm guessing like the ideal scenario is high porosity and permeability, but low water saturation. So there's plenty of space for the oil, it can flow easily, and there's not a ton of water in the way.
You got it. And what's interesting is this study found that as you go deeper into the Mishra formation, all three of these properties generally get better.
Deeper is better, okay. Can you throw some numbers at me? Like how much better are we talking?
All right, so for porosity, it averages about 0.13 in that shallower MRA layer. But then when you go down to the deeper MRB, it jumps up to 0.21.
Okay, that's a pretty decent jump.
Now for permeability, it's even more dramatic. Starts around 7 millidarcies in MRA and then boom, shoots up to 200 millidarcies in MRB.
Whoa, 200. That's a big difference. All right, what about water saturation? What's going on there?
Water saturation, it does the opposite. Decreases as we go deeper. So it's high up in MRA, but then much lower in those deeper parts of MRB, which means more space for oil down there.
All right, so if I'm putting all this together, it sounds like those deeper sections of MRB, those are the real sweet spots. High porosity, high permeability, and low water saturation. That's what we're after.
Yeah, you got it. And that's exactly where this 3D model comes in. It lets us actually see these properties, how they're spread throughout the formation.
Okay, this 3D model is sounding more and more impressive. How'd they even create it?
Well, they took data from 5 wells that were drilled into the formation. It's like piecing together one of those high-tech jigsaw puzzles,
I see.
They took all these measurements from each well, porosity, permeability, water saturation, the whole works, and then used that data to build like a 3-dimensional picture of the entire formation.
So it's like they took snapshots from different spots and then stitched them together to get like this big panoramic view.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And this 3D model, it lets us see beyond those individual well points, right?
Yeah.
We get this much more complete picture of the Mishra formation and how the oil is distributed within it.
Okay, so tell me, what does this panoramic view reveal about the oil potential in different zones of the Mishra formation?
Well, the figures and the appendix in the paper, those are really insightful, especially the ones showing how porosity, water saturation, and permeability are all distributed. Imagine like a treasure map, right? Where the areas with the best properties for oil extraction, those light up as the hotspots. That's what these visualizations let us see.
Wow, that's really cool. So this 3D model, it's not just a pretty picture. It's like this powerful tool to really understand how complex the Mishra formation is and maybe even guide future exploration, right?
Exactly. It's crucial for figuring out how oil moves through the formation and finding those sweet spots where we can get the most oil out.
Okay, so We've been talking about this 3D model and how it helps us visualize the Mishra formation, but I'm curious, you mentioned that it can like simulate how oil actually moves, right? Can you expand on that a bit?
Right. It's not just a static image. It's dynamic. We can actually use it to, simulate how fluids like oil flow through the formation. We can
Yeah.
actually see how the oil moves over time.
So it's like running a virtual experiment, watching the oil in action, but like deep underground. That's pretty wild. Does this help address some of those uncertainties in estimating oil reserves that we talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. Because by simulating that fluid flow, we can identify the areas where oil flows more easily, you know. And that's really important when you're planning like drilling operations and trying to get as much oil out as possible. It's not just about the quantity, but the accessibility, right?
Makes sense. Now, the paper mentions something called the CPI, and I got to be honest, acronyms and me, we don't always get along. So can you break down what that is and how it fits into this 3D model?
Sure. CPI stands for Continuous Permeability Indicator. It's basically a value that's it's calculated from well log measurements. And it gives us another way to estimate permeability. Remember, that's how easily fluids can move through the rock.
Okay, so it's like another piece of the puzzle, adding more detail to how we understand the Mishra formation.
Precisely. And by incorporating that CPI into the 3D model,
Hmm.
researchers can, they can make the simulation even better, get an even more accurate picture of how that reservoir is flowing. It's about, building a really comprehensive and dynamic understanding.
Got it. Now, you mentioned earlier that the Mishra formation is a carbonate reservoir. Can you remind me what that actually means and why it matters?
Yeah, so carbonate reservoirs, they're formed from the accumulation of like marine organisms over millions of years,
Hmm.
like shells, corals, things like that. Those eventually solidify into rock, typically limestone or dolomite. And those rocks can be really good at storing and transmitting fluids like oil.
So it's like this ancient ecosystem, that's now an oil reservoir. That's incredible. How does that impact how we explore for oil?
Well, carbonate reservoirs, because of how they form, they often have really complex structures and pore systems,
Yeah.
makes them both challenging and rewarding to explore. We have to really understand those unique characteristics to be successful.
So it's like nature created these intricate underground mazes and we're trying to navigate them to get to this valuable resource.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
that's what makes this research in this 3D model so important. We're combining detailed data from the wells with these sophisticated models, and it helps us get a better understanding of those complex carbonate reservoirs, and ultimately it can help us get more oil out.
Speaking of getting more oil out, this oil field, right, with like 13 billion barrels, it seems like that would have a pretty big impact,
Right.
economically, geopolitically, all of that. What comes to mind for you when you think about the impact of a discovery like this?
Well, a discovery this big, it has the potential to really change the energy landscape, both for Iraq and globally. I mean, Iraq's already a big player, right?
Hmm.
Fifth largest proven oil reserves in the world, and they're a big part of OPEC. This discovery, it could really boost their production and maybe even bump them up higher in the rankings.
Okay, so more production from Iraq, that's going to impact the global oil market, right?
Yeah.
What could this mean for like prices?
Right. So increased production, it could change that supply-demand balance. So
Yeah.
in the short term, we might actually see lower oil prices, which would be good for consumers, but it could also, it could impact oil companies' profits. It's a delicate balance.
It seems like there are a lot of moving parts here. What about the long-term implications? We're in this world that's increasingly trying to move to cleaner energy sources. So how does this massive oil discovery fit into that?
That's a really important point. And while, yes, the world is moving towards renewables, oil and gas, those are going to be important sources of energy for a while still. And this discovery, it could give us a bit more time to make that transition to renewables.
So it's kind of a paradox, isn't it? This huge oil discovery, right, when we're trying to move away from fossil fuels. What does this mean for Iraq then as they navigate this really complex situation?
Well, Iraq, they need to balance, the economic opportunities that come with this discovery with the need to diversify their economy, right? And invest in a sustainable future. It's a tricky situation. They need to use this resource in a smart way, make sure it benefits everyone in Iraq, and at the same time, plan for a future that's not so reliant on oil.
So it's a lot of responsibility that comes with this discovery. You're right. It's not just about getting the oil out. It's about using it to build a better future.
Absolutely. It's about making good decisions now to ensure a good future. Iraq has a real opportunity here to strengthen their economy, but also to invest in a future where clean energy plays a bigger role.
This has been a fascinating discussion. We started with a research paper about a specific oil field, and we're talking about like global energy transitions. What's the one key takeaway you'd want our listeners to really think about?
I think the most important takeaway is that even discoveries like this, they can have huge implications, right? It shows how connected our world really is, like how science, economics, geopolitics, they're all linked together.
It's been great exploring all these connections with you. Thanks for walking us through this.
It was my pleasure. It's always
Sure.
fun to dive into a topic like this. And I hope it's made you, curious to learn more.
Definitely has. And to our listeners, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep those brains working. Until next time. All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into this Mishriff formation. We've covered a lot of ground, the technical stuff, that incredible 3D model, and even, touched on how this all fits into the global energy picture. But now I want to really zero in on what this discovery, this potential 13 billion barrels of oil, what that means for Iraq and its place in the world.
Yeah, it's definitely a big deal. It could be a game changer, really. I mean, Iraq already has like the fifth largest proven oil reserves globally,
Yeah.
and they're a key player in OPEC.
Yeah.
So this discovery at West Qurna 2, it could boost their production capacity significantly, potentially, even push them higher in those global rankings.
Okay, so more production capacity for Iraq. That has to have some kind of ripple effect on the global oil market, right? Like, what could this mean for oil prices?
Well, if Iraq starts producing a lot more oil, it could really shift that whole supply-demand balance.
Hmm.
In the short term, we might see lower prices at the pump, which would be good news for consumers. But then on the flip side, it could also impact how profitable oil companies are. It's a bit of a balancing act.
Yeah, definitely a lot of moving parts. What about like the really long-term implications? We're in this world that's increasingly trying to move away from fossil fuels. So how does this massive oil discovery, how does that fit into that bigger picture?
Right. That's the big question. And while, yes, the world is definitely shifting towards renewables, oil and gas, they're going to be important for a while still, for the foreseeable future. And this discovery, well, it could provide like a buffer, maybe give us a bit more time to really make that transition to renewable sources.
So it's almost a paradox, right? This huge oil find at a time when we're trying to like move away from oil. So what does that mean for Iraq then as they try to navigate this really complex situation?
Well, Iraq's got this challenge, right? They have
Yeah.
to balance the economic opportunities that come with this discovery with the need to diversify their economy and invest in a future that's more sustainable. It's a tricky situation for
Yeah.
sure. They have to be smart about how they use this resource, make sure everyone in Iraq benefits, and at the same time, they've got to plan for a future that's not so reliant on oil.
Yeah, it's like the discovery comes with a lot of responsibility. It's not just about getting the oil out of the ground. It's about using it to build a better future.
You got it.
Yeah.
It's about making the right choices now to ensure a good future for Iraq. And this discovery, it gives them a chance to really strengthen their economy, but also to invest in a future where clean energy is a bigger part of the picture.
This whole deep dive has been it's been a wild ride, honestly. Started with a research paper about one specific oil field, and here we are talking about global energy transitions. What a journey. So if there's like one key takeaway you want our listeners to think about, what would it be?
I think the biggest thing to remember is that, even discoveries like this, seemingly isolated, they can have a huge impact. It really shows how interconnected our world is. Science, economics, geopolitics, it's all connected.
It's been fantastic to explore all of that with you. Thanks for being our guide through all of this.
My pleasure. It's always a pleasure to dive into a topic like this,
Yeah.
and I hope it's made you want to learn even more.
Absolutely has. And to our listeners, keep those questions coming, keep exploring, and keep those minds sharp. Until next time, folks.